Juliana Spahr currently holds the Aurelia Henry Reinhardt Professorship. She got her PhD at the State University of New York at Buffalo, and she's been at Mills since 2003. She's the recipient of the 2009 Hardison Poetry Prize, awarded by the Folger Shakespeare Library to honor a U.S. poet whose art and teaching demonstrate great imagination and daring. She received the National Poetry Series Award for her first collection of poetry, Response, in 1996. Also a critic, Spahr has published Everybody's Autonomy, Connective Reading and Collective Identity in 2001. She edits the art journal Chain with Jenna Osman, and her most recent publications include The Transformation, 2007, and Well, Then, There, Now, 2011. Please welcome Juliana Spahr.
I'll be back. Does anyone want to run after? Hi, thanks for being here. I'm going to read a condensed version of the last poem called "The Incinerator" in this book, and so I'm going to explain it, which I don't normally do because it's a poem. It has 5 sections. And 2 of them, it's a somewhat autobiographical. There's a lot of it that's taken from other sources, but it has 2 sections that are alphabetical, that are a mixture of all this information about where I'm from, which is this town in southern Ohio, and my memories. And I split them in half so that there's a section that goes from A to Z that's pre-NAFTA, and there's a middle section of prose in which I talk about this book by Hannah Wiener called Radcliffe and Guatemalan Women, which I'm not going to read the part that's about the Hannah Wiener poem. It kind of goes into this book report, and I think it'll be fine if I just drop that out. And then there's another alphabetical section that goes from Z to A that's post-NAFTA, which I'm not going to read. So it's just going to be very condensed, in other words. So 1. We are at the incinerator behind the house. It is a 4-foot square made out of cinder blocks, about 3 feet high. I have just dumped our trash in there and then set it on fire. We are now sitting on the edge, away from the smoke, striking matches against the cinder blocks. When they flare, we hold on to them until they burn our fingers, and then we throw them into the incinerator. I drop one of the matches on my leg, faking injury, so as to lean into Chillicothe. Chillicothe leans back. We turn towards each other as if we did it all the time. I start unbuttoning Chillicothe's shirt. It is difficult to unbutton because it has many small white buttons, and as I do it, I keep fumbling. Chillicothe seems disconnected from what's happening. I pull the shirt open, exposing the roads we take through hilltops and hollows as we travel the line between glaciated and unglaciated, and I look down at Chillicothe, grinning, unable to believe I'm actually about to do what I've dreamed of so many times. And then Chillicothe says, "This is my first time." I laugh. I say, "You're kidding." Chillicothe whispers back, "I'm sorry." I look down at Chillicothe, my grin fading, marveling at flatness giving way to rolling hills. Chillicothe lies beneath me, embarrassed and vulnerable. This is not the mythically carnal creature of my fantasies. This is a nervous child. Chillicothe says, "I still want to do it. I just thought I should tell you, in case you wondered why I wasn't better. And then over the Scioto, the big Scioto, the great Scioto, a fine river, and yet also one among many, and yet still the one that carved the valley. This valley, exceptionally wide. As I'm plucking with Chillicothe in the vegetable garden behind the house. No one can see us because we are lying down in between the rows of corn. I'm atop Chillicothe, and I straddle Chillicothe's chest. My breasts are in Chillicothe's face, and Chillicothe cups them. Amid floodplain soils and hills that extend south past the farmlands and their ordered squares, as I lean down and stick my tongue in Chillicothe's mouth. I kiss Chillicothe, move Chillicothe's hands up, hold both of Chillicothe's arms over Chillicothe's head. Then my hips are above Chillicothe's face now, hips above Chillicothe's face, moving slightly, oh so slightly, And then out of the valley, past Mount Pisgah and Swigger Knob, the wild game trails, the war trails, I lower my hips onto Chillicothe's face and lower over chest, navel. Then my hands are inside. My hands are inside going south to Portsmouth to the river and then on south to Ashland. And Chillicothe's head arches back, throat wide, as I also arch back, hips grind, breasts high. Hips grind, breasts high, and somewhere along the way, the hill meets the sky evenly, and the air gets so heavy it is often called blue. I should tell you, Chillicothe is the name of the town that I'm from, which I should have told you that in the beginning. 1969, 17.8% poverty in Appalachia. 1979, 14.1%. And not really rooted in economics. And sometimes when people came by the radio station, she would curse at them and tell them that my father was the son of a bitch. And then the map was the world. Appalachia had lost 40 jobs for 100 people in 1969. As I write this, other stories keep popping up, and I keep abandoning them. The nuances around race and the contemporary U.S. As I write this, other stories keep popping up, and I keep abandoning them. She was probably saying something about how she did not see her life in the static and unhappy way working-class lives were presented in books and movies. As I write this, other stories keep popping up, and I keep abandoning them. Shame about being working-class transformed into claims of authenticity from her generation to my generation. As I write this, other stories keep popping up, and I keep abandoning them. Class has something relational about it, making its discussions in the U.S., one of the wealthiest countries in the world, especially fraught. As I write this, other stories keep popping up, and I keep abandoning them. The hours I spent drinking beers with the baggers at grocery store parking lots. As I write this, other stories keep popping up, and I keep abandoning them. The intense humidity and haze of summer that defines the region with its own beauty. As I write this, other stories keep popping up, and I keep abandoning them. The feeling of obligation to fuck the men who worked at the paper mill because they worked at the paper mill. As I write this, other stories keep popping up, and I keep abandoning them. The alphabetical list is a device that falsely suggests there might be a place for everything. But if I pulled the shade, I was worried that my father might get fired. He did a 4 a.m. shift on the air, and then once that was done, at 10 a.m., he would sell advertisements until evening. I also knew she was upper class because she could look out a window in her house and see into the radio station through the bathroom window. I assumed people who identified as other races lived there also, but I didn't know the names of those races because at the time I only saw black and white. I had grown up by defining class as being about the sort of housing one had in relations to one's neighbors. I started working at the radio station when I was 16. If someone closed the bathroom door, she would get on the phone and call over and tell them to open it. In 1960, the region had 6.8% unemployment, and then the nation had 5%. Not only did she live in a house, but she lived in a fancy house. On school trips, we went each year to visit the paper mill, some smelling like fermentation. The 1970 census revealed that 18% had incomes below the official poverty level. The 1970s was a pivotal decade because the region relied heavily on coal mining, and the OPEC oil embargo contributed to a global increase in the price of coal. The anxiety in her voice when the car needed repair. The corporation, we called it Quig, after the man who was our contact with it, fired Cherokee Maiden and the Secret Squirrel and replaced them with a computer. The house was located between 2 sets of apartment buildings. The map was the neighborhood. The upper-class boss was gone and replaced by a corporation. The upper-class boss would fire my father all the time, but it never stuck. The war on poverty was declared for Appalachia in 1964. There was 1 in 3 in poverty. That was the sort of thing upper-class people did. We bought our food without food stamps, and we talked about how we did this a lot as a point of pride and distinction. We worried a lot about my father getting fired. 3. I was trying to understand my mother when she called us middle class all through my childhood, and why she said this, since by all the markers of economic resources, education, and cultural access within the U.S., we were working class. When I years later asked her why, she said that we were middle class because we lived in a house between 2 apartment buildings. I was trying to think about what was right about what she said. The house she was talking about was owned by my father's boss. It was built out of cinder blocks, and it had 4 rooms, plus a bathroom, a kitchen, and a living room at the front, 2 bedrooms at the back. It also had a carport and a gravel driveway leading to the carport. It had a linoleum floor. It had 2 picture windows. One looked out on the carport and one on the apartments next door. The house was pleasant. Its main drawback was that it leaked a lot and was very damp, so things in the house tended to get covered with the green mildew if left on the floor. When my mother was saying we were middle class, she was saying something less about our neighborhood and more about our location on the block, and something about our location on the globe at the same time. I was trying to think about what was right about what she said. I was trying to think about the role of the U.S. government enforcing reduced tariff barriers on numerous countries. I was trying to think about the general agreement on tariffs and trade. I was trying to think about women packing ice cream in the Gaza Strip. I was trying to think about the World Trade Organization. I was trying to think about women sewing garments in Liberia. I was trying to think about the North American Free Trade Agreement. I was trying to think about women selling shrimp in Honduras. I was trying to think about the Dominican Republic Central America Free Trade Agreement. I was trying to think about women cultivating cassava in Zambia. I was trying to think about a number of bilateral agreements. I was trying to think about Hannah Wiener's Radcliffe and Guatemalan women. And this is a point where I skipped the Hannah Wiener story, although it's quite lovely. I can tell you afterwards about it. While thinking about my mother's assertion, Hannah Wiener's poem is lovely, not mine, right? While thinking about my mother's assertion that we were middle class, while thinking about Radcliffe and Guatemalan women, while thinking about women's employment in the countries with the highest percentage of women in poverty, while thinking about how the manipulation of trade barriers by the U.S. government was adversely impacting women across many different nations, while thinking about how at the same time the global economy empowers some women and disempowers others, I was trying to think about what sort of vision one needed to have in order to keep one eye on the neighborhood, and then one eye on the nation, and then yet one more eye on the world. I was trying to think, in other words. I wanted to write something about Chillicothe. I am from Chillicothe. In my family, I am the Chillicothean. My parents were from somewhere else, and yet I am not really a Chillicothean anymore, and that feels obvious when I go back there. So my next thought was then, maybe it is that I'm a child of Chillicothe, and I sat down to figure out what that might mean. I was trying to write something about being a child of a certain moment, of a certain class, working class, and then an adult of a different moment, of a different class, middle class. I was attempting to grow some other eyes. I wanted to write something about Chillicothe, even as my story is not the story of Chillicothe, even as Chillicothe and I both benefit from the economic incentives that Lyndon B. Johnson's 1964 War on Poverty allocates to Appalachia, even as I take these incentives and I leave town and benefit from globalization in numerous ways, even as I continue to benefit today, even as Chillicothe's fortunes dwindle a few years after NAFTA when its industries go south. Each morning as I tried to develop a multi-eyed focus, I would sit down at my desk and go into a trance and write down whatever came up. I left Chillicothe more or less for good when I was 21, so I ended up with a lot of childhood memories, most of them personally pleasant. I kept these totems in a file, and when I got tired of gathering them, I tried to rebuild the town from the outside, from statistics, and I'd arrange all these parts of Chillicothe's in various patterns and try to see what sort of place the various patterns made. And then the kind of post-NAFTA reverse alphabetical list. And then this ending, epilogue 5. These are the roads we take. The roads we take through hilltops and hollows, standing at the line that distinguishes the glaciated from the unglaciated, marveling at the flatness giving way to rolling hills. Over the Scioto, the big Scioto, the great Scioto, a fine river, and yet also one among many, and yet still the one that carved this valley exceptionally wide as it left floodplain soils amid the hills that extend south past the farmlands with their ordered squares and out of the valley, past Mount Pisgah and Swigger Knob, the wild game trails, the war trails, south to Portsmouth, to the river, south to Ashland, somewhere along the way. The hills meet the sky evenly. The air gets heavy. It is often called blue. It is all there, the black sandstone, the dissected plateaus, eroded and rough, layers of limestone, sandstone, shale, and coal sediment. Streams going off in all directions. The road, almost cultureless, exits at even intervals, floats above the desire I want as epilogue, for in my heart seeds of unending love still and also despite. Thanks.